Welcome back to episode 3 of Cast a Commotion, Deckheads. Thanks again for checking this out. We're past the beginner stages of this podcast. We're past the absolute, here's just how to get going, here's what to expect, here's how to become a better player, all that. Obviously, there's going to be more advanced and in-depth coverage of that kind of stuff in the future, but for now, I want to start taking deep dives into sets. I want to start taking better looks at the mechanics that came from those sets and the heroes as well, to give people more of an understanding of what they can expect should they choose to play some of these heroes or use some of these mechanics. To begin, we're looking at Welcome to Rathe. That is a place near and dear to every Flesh and Blood player that's been around the whole time. It's the first set, it's the alpha, it's where it all began in October of 2019, and it's what we'll be talking about this time on Cast a Commotion. Welcome to Rathe. After what have to be thousands of years of just world building, uneasy peace, war is beginning to pop up left and right between the light, the dark, the technologies, the savage lands. Everything is starting to erode, and it all starts here in the beginning set of Flesh and Blood, Welcome to Rathe. We're going to take a look at the mechanics and the heroes that come from these, where they hail from, a little bit of story maybe here and there, depending on how into it I get, and really just a deeper dive into what came from this set, specifically talking about the mechanics. So the set's not particularly large, and considering most cards have a red, blue, and yellow card, it has a set number of 226, so yeah, it sounds like kind of a lot sometimes, but it's just not. It doesn't have a lot to collect. It just has a lot of staples that you'll be using and a great draft environment. So if you can get a hold of this set, definitely do so and jump in. This is the first time we actually get a look at the set, so I'll go over some of the basic stuff that some advanced players may not need a refresher on, but nevertheless, if you're jumping into this podcast and you're a newer player, I think you'll appreciate it. So obviously, being the first set, we're looking at resource, power, defense, life, and intellect, things we've never seen before unless you've played or followed the first bit of the first couple episodes and played along, right? Quick breakdown. Resource can either be divided between either is it the cost or how much it provides. That's given on the top of the card. I've already gone over the card anatomy in episode 2, I believe. It might have actually been 1. I can't already remember. It's been too long. Followed that with power. That's the attack power. That's how much damage a card will do if it's presented as an attack. The defense value. Most cards have the ability to defend, and the defense value is how much it will block of the damage coming in at you. Life is just how much you're going to start the game with, and intellect is how many cards you draw at the end of your turn. Just a quick brief, because I know we've already been over that at some point. I want to go over all of the mechanics that come from Welcome to Rathe. They're all very important staple mechanics that you're going to see over and over again as we continue into the next sets. And we'll just jump right in first off with Battle Worn. This is to represent that equipment can be used multiple times, so it's equipment that wears down over time. If you defend with a card with Battle Worn, you put a -1 defense counter on it. That's to represent it getting weaker over time, right? Doesn't sound like a huge deal, but when a piece of equipment can block for as much as a card in hand and it isn't affected by other abilities, it can be a huge deal. The example I'm going to use is just my most familiar one, Refraction Bolters. Those are the legs for warriors. It just says, defense 1, Battle Worn. If you defend with Refraction Bolters, put a -1 defense counter on it when the combat chain closes. And the reason I wanted to bring up a card is so we can parse that sentence. When you defend with this card, any equipment with Battle Worn, it remains on the combat chain until it closes. That way you can't defend with it a couple of times in a row, but if the combat chain closes, you can. There's just not a lot of equipment that's very good at that. The -1 counter stays on the card until it's destroyed or until the game ends. That's a permanent thing that happens. And then if the defense of a card is below 0, it's just 0. You can't go below or anything like that. As far as I know, it just becomes 0. That is noted somewhere. The next mechanic that you're going to see on a lot of equipment is called Blade Break. This is to represent fragile equipment, cloth equipment maybe, or something that's just brittle and shittily made. It breaks after you defend with it, but only after you defend with it and when the combat chain closes. The one that came with most decks back then was Iron Rot Helm. It's just a helmet, Blade Break. If you defend with the Iron Rot Helm, destroy it when the combat chain closes. Again, most effects are going to trigger at the end of the combat chain, so they just stay up there the entire time. Just like Battle Worn, it stays up there until the chain closes. You can't defend with it multiple times. And then when it's destroyed, it's sent to your graveyard. When most cards say this is destroyed, it goes to your graveyard. There may be other exceptions in the future or based on what the card says, but this is typically the case. The ability for Blade Break goes, something to note, is even though it does say it goes in the layer, no player gets priority at this time. It's just to note that things are stacking and things will resolve in order. That's just to tell you if there's multiple triggers at the end of a combat chain that they're going to go onto a layer and they're going to trigger in order based on priority turn player, right? So that's kind of the first thing we're going to get into that's complicated is you need to be aware of what's layering. The next ability, we're just going to go in alphabetical order, is Combo. A ninja mechanic. It's to show how strong attacks can get when chained correctly in sequence. Combo only cares about the last card that was played, the last attack card that was played this exact combat chain. So the longer your chain goes, the more names you can get on there, possibly the more combo cards you can get out. The example we'll use is Whelming Gustwave. It's the one that is just here as an example. It's a ninja action attack. If Surging Strike was the last attack this combat chain, Whelming Gustwave gains +1 power. Go again. And if this hits, draw a card. Right? So there you can see if Surging Strike was the last attack on this combat chain. It doesn't say anything about it has to hit. It doesn't have to hit. It doesn't have to be a successful attack. It just has to have been the last attack. It will then give Whelming Gustwave all these great effects. +1 power, go again, and if this hits, draw a card, right? Only the name of the last attack matters. It doesn't have to be the same card that's becoming relevant in newer sets. But as of this time, it didn't matter a whole lot. Other variables don't matter. It doesn't care about what color, what pitch, all that other stuff. It just cares about the name. You can still play an attack if combo isn't active. It's just a way bad card if you do that. There's no way it's worth it 9 times out of 10 to play a card without combo. It's very simple mechanic, and that's why this is showcased in Welcome to Rathe. Is all of these mechanics don't require a whole lot of thought. Pretty simple. They're just good and easy to use. The next one is Crush. This mechanic is from Guardian cards. It shows the strength of the Guardian and how much damage they can really do to you. When you get hit by a card with Crush, if it deals 4 or more damage, it applies an effect. The one we're going to talk about is Disable. That's the example given. It's a Guardian attack, and it says if it deals 4 or more damage, put a card from their arsenal on the bottom of its owner's deck. Right? Crush only checks the amount dealt. Prevented damage doesn't count. It has to hit. I know somewhere in the specification of the rules it says it has to hit. You can't do some tricky stuff and make the card deal 4 damage. That's stuff that will come up later. The ability is a triggered static ability, and it's written as when it deals 4 or more damage. Something to note is that Crush is a conditional event on damage. It's not an on-hit ability. There are some cards that say, don't let an on-hit happen, or cards don't have an on-hit anymore. Crush is not that. It's a triggered static ability upon dealing 4 damage. It removes itself from the hit element, which is a little weird. Just something for you to note in the future since some of these cards are starting to come out that prevent on hits. Since we're talking about Crush, you can't talk about Crush without Dominate. Those two go hand in hand. It represents an attack that's really difficult to defend. It means it can't be defended with more than 1 card from your hand. That means you can still block with equipment, defense reactions played from your arsenal, right? And then you get up to 1 card from your hand to block as well, but only one of those cards can come from your hand. Playing a defense reaction from your hand does count as the 1 card from your hand. Just note, like, it's not because it's a different kind of card and you're not technically blocking with it in a block step, right? Nope, it's defending with a card from hand. That is a specific phrasing, right? Just keep all that in mind. One of the most important phrases you're going to get from Welcome to Rathe is Go Again. This one allows multiple actions to be played in a turn by resolving, right? When an action with Go Again resolves, you get that action point back. So you spend your action point. In the previous podcast, I had said this is red light, green light. You play a card, light goes red. The card resolves, light goes green. This is how. When an action with Go Again resolves, it gains 1 action point, or the player does. And then multiple instances of Go Again do not stack. So if you somehow give a card go again like 3 times, right? Like if you see 3 green lights, you don't go the speed of light, right? It's just you don't get multiplicative effects. It's just a green light you can then pass, right? Yeah, you only resolve it and gain 1 action point. So just be on the lookout for things that turn off go again or don't let you get go again. And remember a few things about go again are go again for attacks. Check during what's called the link step, right? It's a game state where combat can either continue or close the chain, right? So after the attack has done damage, you've passed your reactions, all that stuff. You've calculated damage dealt or not, right? You start resolving all abilities that happen from on hits or whatever or defense, blah 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 blah. You resolve all that stuff, and then you start the link step. Okay, and then if the attack has go again, you gain 1 action point here, right? So attacks only gain you that action point if you go all the way through and you're about to link to another combat chain or close the chain, right? If the chain for some reason closes prematurely and you do not reach this step, you do not gain the benefits of that go again. But that's enough on that for right now. That's going to be more for like advanced concepts when we get into heroes themselves. The next ability that came from Welcome to Rathe is Intimidate, a brute mechanic, right? It shows how scared you are once the brute starts swinging. It removes random cards from your hand and makes it difficult to block because you might have a strategy. Oh, I have a defensive action in my hand. These are good 3 blocks. Well, not if they get taken from your hand because you're afraid to fight, right? That's what Intimidate represents. It says target hero banishes face down a random card from their hand, and at the beginning of the end phase, return all cards banished this way to their owner's hand. So a good thing to note here is that a player who owns the banished card may look at it. It is not just everyone else, it's me too, that has this really bad habit of just adding words to cards to make it make sense, right? So when I was explained Intimidate and I used Rhinar for the first time, I thought, and I had told my friend, and when we looked at the card and saw how it read, we had both agreed at the time, but we now know this is not the case. I thought because it was banished face down at random, I thought it was kind of like a memory skill check. Like, oh, maybe you don't remember what you were trying to block with. Maybe you don't remember exactly. You're so afraid, blah, blah. Like, I'm adding context to a card for close to no reason. Really try not to do that. Try to really read it at face value. A target hero banishes face down a random card from their hand. Okay, so that happens. At the beginning of the end phase, return all cards banished this way to their owner's hand. Nowhere in there does it say they can't look at the card, but we took it that way and we played it that way for quite some time. That would be incredible, and I feel like it's way stronger that way, but that's probably why it's not that way. Other important things to note about Intimidate are you can target yourself with this ability. So in the playing of a card with Intimidate, or paying the cost and gaining the Intimidate off of Rhinar, right, which we'll go over later, you start the Intimidate before the attack even happens. There's not a lot of reasons I can think of you'd want to intimidate yourself, but it's something you can do. Keep a note of that for future games. It may come in handy. Other thing to note, you don't have to have cards in hand to Intimidate, right? It just happens. So it doesn't like cancel the ability or anything like that. The next ability, Intimidate's pretty simple, so we're just going to move on to the next ability. It's Reprise. It's a warrior mechanic to show. It shows how practiced warriors are and how they always have a response to something. If you present a defense, they know that defense. They're going to try to get over it with their practiced attack. That's what Reprise is. These effects are enabled when heroes block with cards from their hand. One of my favorite cards in Dorinthia, well, not just Dorinthia, but in Warrior, is Overpower. It's a warrior attack reaction. And it says target weapon attack gains, the red one is +4 power. Okay. That notes that it does come in yellow and blue. Those give you +3 and +2. Not super strong when you look at the cost of 3, right? 3 cost for 4 power, that's really bad considering the average for a card. I think if I remember right, we talked about Wounding Blow and how it's 0 for 4. Well, why am I paying 3 for 4? A, it's a reaction, so it comes after the block, so they may not have known it was coming. So that's kind of the balance there. B, it has Reprise. That's the ability we're talking about. It says, if the defending hero has defended with a card from their hand, this chain link. It doesn't care if they blocked with a card from their hand in the previous attack. It's this one. If they block this attack with a card from their hand, the attack gains an additional 2 power. That all of a sudden becomes 3 for 6 as a surprise attack. That's pretty solid. Like I said, it only cares about the current chain link. It doesn't care what happened in previous attacks. And it checks at the time you play the card. So if a card with Reprise is played, then a defense reaction is played from your opponent, it doesn't retroactively apply. You don't just get the benefit because they did that. That's what creates this game of like cat and mouse and flowchart dynamics with warriors. Equipment cards and cards from arsenals are obviously not cards from your hand, so they don't trigger Reprise. The more technical thing about this ability, is you need to wait for cards to have been declared as a defending card, right? So in the block step, that's very easy. It's I'm attacking with my sword. You block with a card from hand. Well, you've defended with a card from hand. That answer is easy. But if they don't block, and then during the reaction step they say, oh, I'm gonna sink below. I'm gonna use a defense reaction card. You need to wait for that defense reaction to resolve. So it goes attack, no blocks, you declare no reactions, they declare a reaction. You need to pass priority on that reaction and let them sink below. Let them do their draw a card and put a card in the bottom or whatever. You need to let that card resolve. Because if that has not resolved, it is not a defending card yet. Reprise says they need to defend with a card. And in the technicals, I think it's only becomes defending and is moved to the current chain link instead of the graveyard when it resolves. It may be in the reaction step rules or something like that, but the point is, it is very blatantly said that the card needs to resolve first. So don't do a gotcha bitch. Don't do that. don't get super excited. Don't really get into the high gotcha moment, right? That is how you give away free information and let the player use that to their advantage if they're a card shark, right? If they're an absolute shark about the rules. Many people will not be during armories, but the second you start putting higher pricing, pro quests, road to nationals, and then any event above that as well, your opponent doesn't owe you anything. Your opponent owes you a good luck, have fun, and a good game at best. Just remember that, right? Prizing's on the line. They're trying to win too. That simple. They want a good, clean game. You should be playing a good, clean game anyway. I do not condone card sharking. I do not condone rules sharking. I'm just saying it's a reality of a competitive game. So that's how Reprise works. I only get so far into that because, like I said, Dorinthia is one of my favorite heroes. Sorry for wasting so much time on that. But let's just move on to the heroes, okay? Because that's all the mechanics. That's all the mechanics that really came out of Welcome to Rathe. Really simple set. It was really meant to get players into the game and introduce them on how much fun this is and give you base level mechanics. The advanced stuff comes later. I think most of the heroes in Welcome to Rathe were designed to give you an understanding of the combat chain, a few reactionary steps, and really just the steps that go into the action phase, right? It's not till later that we start dealing more with layered effects, instant speed, all that other stuff. We don't really start dealing with that until later. The first hero we talk about, continuing on our alphabetical trend, is Bravo. I have a lot of experience with this hero, not because I play it, but because my sparring partner was smashing my head in with him for quite a while. Just a guardian hero. All of the heroes from this set have intellect 4, health 20 for Blitz, 40 for Classic Constructed or Young and Adult, right? Really simple heroes. Bravo just says, as an action, pay 2 resources. Until the end of your turn, your attack action cards with cost 3 or greater gain Dominate. Go again, right? So parse that out. It has a cost of 2 resources, so you have to pitch to that. And then until the end of your turn, all of your attack action cards that cost 3 or more gain Dominate. Interesting that it says attack action cards, not your next attack. Something to note, it's really hard to pull off multiple attacks in Guardian that involve cards. Just something to note. It gains Dominate. That's that defend, that makes it hard to defend ability, right? They can only defend with 1 card from hand. And then it says go again, right? That doesn't say that the attack gets go again, which could be confusing to some new players who say your attack action cards with, why wouldn't it give my next attack go again if it wants me to attack with multiple cards? Right? That's that thing where you're just like adding. I'm not saying you're immediately doing it right now. I'm just saying don't add extra words to justify cards in ways. Just read the card. So it says go again. The attack action, like I said, doesn't gain go again, but the ability has go again, which lets you then proceed with your turn. The green light turns on again. A lot of synergies you're going to find with that card. We'll just go over a few of them right here. The first one that comes to mind is probably my favorite card in all of Guardian cards, Spinal Crush. Right? It attacks for 9. That's huge. It's not the biggest attack, but it's huge, right? You give that attack Dominate. Most cards block for 3, maybe 4. That means if they don't want this crush effect, which is a crushing crush effect, they're going to block with armor or all other kinds of shenanigans. They're going to need to try to get around this any way they can, right? So Spinal Crush is an attack for 9, and if it does 4 or more damage, action cards, activated abilities, and attacks they control lose and can't gain go again. That means they're only doing one thing, most likely, unless they get a bunch of action points somehow, right? It's possible but it's still a very debilitating effect. The other famous card being Bravo's specialization, Crippling Crush. This one attacks for 11. So if this has Dominate, it becomes extraordinarily difficult if you're not like a very tough class to get through this. But if it deals 4 or more damage, you discard 2 random cards. It's half your hand is gone. It's just crippling. So, well, Crippling Crush, right? So that's why Dominate and why Bravo's abilities and cards all work together so well is he naturally says, hey, this is going to happen. I could make it happen right now. And he will. Every time. It sucks. It's the worst. I'm not going to go on the rest of that rant. But that's Bravo, the Guardian of Welcome to Rathe. Simple, straightforward, big attacks, crippling. Next up, you have Dorinthia. I'm not going to go too in-depth because I already have. But she's the warrior of the set. Same, 4 intellect, 20 health, 40 health. Her ability actually is a little bit more irritating for new players because of the way it reads. It says, once per turn effect. When your weapon attack hits, you may attack an additional time with that weapon this turn. To me, the new player who just picked up that game, that told me, oh yeah, I can just do it. I can just attack with the weapon again. Why not? The ability does not give the weapon go again. Okay? You still need to have an action point to attack the second time, which means you need to give the Dawnblade go again or gain an action point somehow after the attack, right? The only thing the ability does is it bypasses once per turn action attacks, right? Most weapons have once per turn action attack written on them, right? So that means they can only attack once with the weapon. This one allows you to do it again, right? Also, much like Crush, the effect is mandatory. The first weapon you hit with each turn gets this effect. It can't be saved up. So, like, there are other cards like Duskpath Pilgrimage and Twinning Blade, which say the exact same thing. You may attack an additional time with that weapon. This ability is going to happen as well. That's fucking sick. The effect is mandatory. The first weapon you hit with each turn gets that effect. It cannot be saved up for a future effect. But if you have other things that say this can hit too, like Duskpath Pilgrimage or Twinning Blade in the future, those do stack, unlike Go Again. They are compulsory effects, and your Dawnblade just basically says, once per turn attack, and then it for some reason says, this may attack an additional time from Dorinthia, and this may attack an additional time from what other effect you gave it. So you will be able to attack with that weapon 3 times, provided you can give it Go Again. Just fun stuff for the Dorinthia players in the future. Next hero up on the block is Katsu. Is a ninja. Same intellect, same health, 4, 20, 40. I think this is the most complicated effect overall for gameplay lines and ability and knowing game states, but not the most complicated ability of the set. It's when an attack action card you control hits once per turn, you may discard a card with cost 0. If you do, search your deck for a card with combo, banish it, face up, then shuffle your deck. You may play it this turn. So parse that all out. Let's parse it out. When an attack action card you control hits, okay, so you have to hit with an attack action card, and this is a once per turn effect. You may discard a card with cost 0. Anything in your hand with 0 cost. If you do, search your deck for a card with combo and banish it face up. The reason you banish it face up is to prove to your opponent that it does in fact have combo, right? It needs to be public information to make sure that you're using a valid target, right? You shuffle up your deck and you can play it this turn. You may elect not to banish the card when searching, so like if you forget that you used everything or something, you don't have to pull a card out, you just have to shuffle up afterwards. And the second most important part is Katsu's hero card effect triggers once per turn, like Dorinthia's. The first time you hit with an attack action card, this happens. Now you can choose not to resolve the effect, right? But the effect will not trigger again. So that's just something to think about. Overall, that ability is not super complicated. We don't have to go over it too much. Just a few things that you can use it for will be like for Katsu's big finishers, like Lord of Wind. Just a big card with combo that likes a lot of cards he runs. Same with Hurricane Technique, a big card with combo that could start up an amazing turn. So yeah, there's that. That's Katsu. The last hero on the block is Reinar, the Brute. Very simple ability. When you discard a card with 6 or more power during your action phase, Intimidate. That's that ability we went over earlier where a target hero banishes face down a random card from their hand, right? So he has a built-in ability to intimidate your opponent. Some of his cards have the ability to do that. You can start to see where this goes. You're stripping away by scaring the living shit out of your opponent. Like, blah, 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 just charging straight at them like an idiot, and then you're just hitting them really hard. That's what Reinar does. He he go big, don't think good, and hits shit hard. Uh, the ability is super easy. You know, it checks the discarded card's base power, obviously. So if a card said this gets +3 at any point in time, you don't count that. You only count the base power. Effects that modify the card's power are also not applied. This would be like if you had a Blood Rush Bellows in effect, which says brewed attacks get +2, right? It doesn't affect the cards in your hand. Okay. Player who owns the cards can look at it, right? Don't be a huge cheater like I was when I first tried playing this hero. The card banished is returned at the beginning of the end phase. It's just one of those layers that happen, but nobody gets priority during this time, so it doesn't matter. This is before players draw up to their hand size, so if you do target yourself, you're not going to get any kind of tricky draws off this. It's just, yeah. I can't think of anything else you talk about when it comes to Intimidate. It's just a very simple strip your opponent's defenses and hit them real big in the head. I guess we'll go over weapons as well. Weapons can be kind of an overlooked facet to this game because people just get really excited about the big flashy cards. But getting beat to death by a Nothos like 50 times is one of the worst experiences on the planet. So you need to know how it works and what it does, so you can plan for the defenses properly. It's a Guardian weapon, can be used by any Guardian. It is Bravo's signature weapon, something to note for later on Living Legend statuses. It's a hammer, and it's a two-handed hammer. So that means you can't use any other weapons, no shields, no one-handers, nothing else with it. It has once per turn, 3 resources, attack. If you have 2 or more cards in your pitch zone with 3 cost or greater, it gains +2 power. The significant thing to note here is that Anothos checks constantly, not just when it attacks. If that criteria is met after the attack is made, it will get the +2 power bonus. So you can be tricky with setting up your plays, but most of the time you'll just be activating a few things beforehand and then swinging for 6. But you can be tricky. If your opponent's at 5 and you've only pitched the 1 card, and you're coming in for 4 and it doesn't look like you have anything else, but you can play an instant and put another 3 coster in that pitch zone, that's the attack for 6 in game. It happens. Not often, but it happens. You can only pitch when there's a cost to play, though. That's the one restriction. I've said that in the previous episodes, and I'll say it over and over again. You can only pitch when there's a cost to pay. You play the card, you play something, you activate an ability, you activate an instant, you generate the cost, and then you pay. The other weapon we're going to talk about is Dawnblade. That's the warrior weapon for this set. That's Dorinthia's signature weapon. It's a 2-handed sword. It's got once per turn, 1 resource, attack, right? It's got a power of 3. If I didn't say Anothos' power, it was 4 at base, 6 at pumped. The Dawnblade has a power of 3, a modest attack, 1 for 3, very good to always have on hand. Its abilities are what you're after. If the Dawnblade hits, and it's the second time it has hit this turn, you put a +1 power counter on the Dawnblade. It's to represent the fact that the warrior is gaining tempo on you. They're gaining an advantage. They're learning your defenses and getting better at tearing you apart, right? It can get out of hand pretty quickly. Not a month ago, I got 4 counters on the Dawnblade on the second turn. Doesn't sound too crazy if you've not played the game yet, but once you realize I'm attacking you for 7 for 1 resource, remember in those first episodes, Wounding Blow is like the generic card. That's like the baseline of cards. 0 cost, 4 damage. Well, this is 1 for 7. That's huge. It's huge attacks. And on top of that, that's a deck that likes to run attack reactions and play tricks on you. It's not fun. Something to note that the Dawnblade does not have Go Again. If it doesn't have Go Again, it can't attack more than once per turn. And then you need to either hit with Dorinthia's ability effect or something else that lets you attack another time with it. It's hard to make happen. Kind of. Depends on how up on the combat chain and Dorinthia your opponent is. But the +1 power is a permanent effect that increases the power of the Dawnblade as long as that counter's there. The downside to having this sweet ability is at the beginning of your end phase, if it did not hit, remove all +1 counters from the Dawnblade. Like it represents her gaining an advantage on you and learning your defenses. If you defense correctly, well, she needs to rethink her plans and start from square one. The next weapon is going to be the Harmonized Kadachi. These are the Deathlocks. These things suck. They close out so many games in the most painful of ways. They're just one-handed daggers, so you can have 2 of them. You should probably take 2 of them if you can. Once per turn action, 1 resource, attack. Now, these only attack for 1. Doesn't sound super impressive. But who's going to block 1? Who's going to block 1 damage? In the early game, nobody. They're just going to be taking a free 1 damage no matter what if you have these daggers. Very rarely will people be blocking this with cards from hand. If you have a card in your pitch zone with cost 0, Harmonized Kodachi gains Go Again. Spoiler, ninjas have a lot of free cards that pitch for blue. So it's just basically pay 2, do 2 damage to an opponent unless they want to sacrifice cards from their hand. That's the important part, because later in the game, when your opponent is down to 2, 3 life, 1, 2, or 3 life, really low, and we're getting tight, they have to block this dagger. They have to block this dagger. You're now taking 2 cards out of their hand every turn by attacking with 1 for 1 damage 2 times. It's painful. All they're doing is opening you up for a bigger attack later, or just grinding you down. They can definitely wear you out just trying to stab you to death, and you will have to block or die. Just like Anothos, it's possible for the Kodachi to gain Go Again after the attack has been declared. You just have to put a card with 0 cost in your pitch zone. They're constantly checking for that. Again, you can only pitch when there's a cost to pay. You really can't go wrong with these things. They're sweet. Katsu's a sweet hero. I think a lot of people will have a lot of fun if they choose him. The last one is, like I said, it just hits you good. The brute weapon. It's the Romping Club. It's a 2-handed club, not a hammer. It's a club. And once per turn action, attack for 2 resources. Attacks for 4. Doesn't seem incredible, but it's solid. And then you realize I may have talked about breakpoints in the previous episodes, but that's what this is. It attacks for 4, and most cards block for 3. So much like the Kodachi, this starts to get real threatening near the end game when you have to be blocking with 1 to 2 cards no matter what, or you die. It has a once per turn effect of if you discard a card with 6 or more power, the Romping Club gains +1 until end of turn. And that's now an attack for 5 for 2 resources at all times that you can do it. It's very good. It's very good at wearing your opponent down. Just like everything else, right? Don't underestimate your weapons. They win games. The only note is this just like Reinar, this checks the card's base power. No modifications are checked when it looks to see if you've discarded a card with 6 or more power. That's it. That's all. Guess I just want to go over maybe like 2 or 3 other cards from Welcome to Rathe you need to keep your eye on. Fyendal Spring Tunic. It's a generic chest piece. Generic means, like I may have explained in previous episodes, you can use it on any hero. You 90% need this card. No card is a true 100% must-have because there's always an alternative. But the Spring Tunic, it's so good. It says, Blade Break, 1 defense, and at the start of your turn, if it has 3 or less energy counters on it, or no, sorry. If it has less than 3 energy counters, you may put an energy counter on it. You may then, as an instant, remove 3 energy counters to gain a resource. It's in a game that's entirely tied around paying from your hand, getting a free resource to attack is it's just gross. You cannot activate Spring Tunic's ability during the start of the turn, right, in response to the trigger, because no one gets priority during the start of the turn. So you kind of have to pick and choose when to use it. You have to have at least 3 energy counters on it to use the ability. There's no way really around that right now that I know of. The Tunic's ability is activated as an instant, which means you can activate it anytime you have priority. Even during the opponent's turn and during the reaction window of their turn, right? Just any time you have priority, you can activate it. It looks really innocuous at first when you look at what cards do. This effect can only be felt, I promise you. Proxy it up, try it out in a few of your games. 10 games in, you'll notice that you probably want this. It's not for every hero, right? But it's for, I would say it's a must-have for 30% of the heroes, and it's a nice-to-have for 50% of the heroes, and the other 20% just have the Carrion Husk. Or something stupid from a later set, you know what I mean? Like, so definitely keep your eye on tunics if you ever get a chance at a good price on one. I'm not going to talk about price other than this is where most of your cost is going to go, is the equipment, right? Just be prepared. It's a big cost, but do note, once you have that one piece of equipment, if you're not a huge collector and you're just here to play the game, you only need the one tunic, and you have it for every deck from then on out, because that's how this game works. Other cards I'd talk about would be Snapdragon Scalers. Get your hands on a pair of these. They're a common. They'll be easy for you to get, but they're used in a mini aggro deck. They just say defense 0, so they can't block, but as an attack reaction, you can destroy them, and the target attack action with cost 1 resource or less gains Go Again. It's free Go Again on the board that you have at all times. It's just good. Make sure to get a hold of a pair of that. Do note that the card Drone of Brutality from this set is banned. I'm sure many of you will be looking at ban lists when you're building your decks, but if you're not, Drone of Brutality is something you need to avoid. And I would say the last card you really want to... I'll go over one more big power and then one sleeper card. I call it a sleeper because I have never been disappointed by the card. The first one is Enlightened Strike. It's a Majestic. Enlightened Strike says, as an additional cost to play Enlightened Strike, put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. So no matter what, you need 2 cards in hand to play the Enlightened Strike, the card and the Enlightened Strike. It's a red card, so it only pitches for 1. It's a generic action. It's an attack. Has 5 power, 3 defense. It's got a ton of good stat there, right? 5 power is a breakpoint already. 3, well, a further up breakpoint from defense reactions. Defense for 3. It's free to play aside from the card you have to put on the bottom. And then on top of that, you get to choose one. So this means this card becomes versatile. You get to draw a card, or you get to give it +2 power, or you get to give it go again. Right? You choose the mode when you play Enlightened Strike, not when it becomes an attack. So in order, it goes play Enlightened Strike, pay the cost of putting a card on the bottom of your deck, choose the mode. And then it becomes a gross attack that provides really, really good on-rate value. The next card I'm going to talk about is just what I think. It's just a common. Get a hold of them. They're easy to play, and they give you big benefits. It's Flock of the Featherwalkers. It's a generic action. It's an attack. It comes in blue, red, and yellow, so it pitches for 3, 2, and 1. It costs 1. And as an additional cost to play Flock of the Featherwalkers, you reveal a card in your hand with 1 or less cost. It says attacks for 3, 4, or 5. So 2 of them are above breakpoints, the yellow and the red one. It only defends for 2. That's kind of the drawback. But it says create a Quicken Aura token. What is a Quicken token, you ask? When you play an attack action card or attack with a weapon, destroy the Quicken token, and then the attack gains go again. It creates a free Snapdragon Scalers for you on the board. It enables such good turns if you have a rough turn and you just have to have a setup turn, or you have a way to give the Flock of the Featherwalkers go again somehow. Keep your eye on this card. It's always an option. It's a generic. It's cheap. Things to note, you have to have at least one other card in your hand, like Enlightened Strike, because you have to reveal to pay the cost, right? You have to reveal a card with 1 cost or less in your hand to play this card. You may not reveal Flock of the Featherwalkers itself to pay the cost because it's not in your hand anymore, it's being played. The Quicken Aura remains in play until it's destroyed, which means until someone destroys it or you attack with an attack action or attack with a weapon. Note, a weapon is not considered attacking until it hits the combat chain. If somehow they stop the attack before then, you keep your Quicken token. You can't reveal a card for an additional cost and then pitch with the same card, right? You need to pay all costs at one time, right? Paying resource cost happens before additional costs anyway, in the order of things. So just remember that. I think it's a clean card. I think it's awesome. These are some of the basic cards and things you can use with Welcome to Rathe. These are the mechanics. These are the cards you should be looking out for. There's a better look at the heroes and what they do and a few advanced concepts for each of them. I believe after listening to this, you'll have a better idea of what those heroes do and what these abilities do. You'll have a better mindset and frame for each of these keywords and what they do during the game, and you'll know how to navigate them a bit better because of the small breakdown we've done here. Once we get deep diving into heroes, not sets, you'll learn tons more, but I think this is a really great midpoint for your entry into Welcome to Rathe. I want to thank everybody for listening in, chipping in, figuring out Flesh and Blood with me. If this is your first podcast for Flesh and Blood, thank you so much for checking us out. I did open up a Patreon. We're going to start giving out a few things on there. Access to the Discord, which has access to a Flesh and Blood League. I did fire one successfully. I'm super excited. I'm still kind of figuring it out. It's rough, man. You got to make it fun. You got to make sure people have access to it. We want to have good price support. I just revealed that the box that we're playing for is an unlimited Arcane Rising box. I'm glad that got a good response. I didn't want people to be disappointed in the prize they were playing for. We're handing out packs left and right just for participating. That way you don't, I believe in a top heavy tournament, but you need to have a reason to be there. So giving you objectives and goals to give you the packs, I think is just fantastic. We fired with 17 people, but a few people just couldn't make time, etc. I wouldn't be mad if anybody who heard this long range and isn't local to my location also wanted to join, because I do give the option to play on TTS, Talishar, whatever. I do prefer to play in person, but if it's just not a thing, it's just not a thing. Thank you all again for listening to this. Make sure to check out our store on TCG Player Crash Command Games. That's what funded all of the equipment that I'm using here today, and the time, really. So just thanks again, everybody. Thanks again, Chooms. And this podcast is zeroed.